Saola batters Hong Kong with strong winds and heavy rain before moving away. The storm leaves a trail of damage in different parts of the city. And transportation services gradually resume after the departure of Saola. Good evening and welcome to TVB News. The observatory issued the strong wind signal number 3 at 4:20 this afternoon. This after Hong Kong issued its first number 10 warning signal since 2018, while the city was battered by super typhoon Saola, which has now been downgraded to a severe tropical storm. Over the course of last night and early this morning, various areas in Hong Kong sustained damage caused by strong winds. Timothy Lee has our top story.
Hung Fa Chun has long been known as a hotspot for typhoon winds. But the strength of Super Typhoon Saola really put on a show last night near the shores of the Hong Kong Island housing estate. Despite calls by the government to stay away from the sea, some ignored warnings to capture the powerful waves, only to get all wet mere moments later. Trees in the area toppled during the powerful storm. Such sights were common throughout the early morning. This resident said he was rarely in Hong Kong during previous number 10 tropical cyclone warning signals, but was very excited at the opportunity to experience Saola himself. Yesterday marked the first hurricane signal number 10 issued in the city since Typhoon Mangkhut in 2018. Across Saiwan, street signs and lampposts could be seen shaking violently. In Causeway Bay, some residents still ventured outside despite the poor weather conditions. Those carrying umbrellas struggled. At the Hung Hom Ferry Pier, miscellaneous items such as metal plates were swept up by the strong wind. Pedestrians had to grab onto pillars just to keep their balance. This man said the wind was so strong that he felt like he was pricked by needles when hit with rain and seawater. Back on Friday, Hong Kong's weather remained calm despite the observatory issuing the number 8 northwest gale or storm signal in the early morning. Showers only increased by the afternoon and worsened drastically by night. The observatory then issued the increasing gale or storm signal number 9 at around 6:30 p.m. before escalating to the number 10 signal at 8:15 p.m. It lasted about 7 hours before the signal was lowered to number 8 and changing to number 3 on Saturday afternoon. According to the observatory's forecast track, the tropical cyclone made landfall near the city of Yangjiang in southwestern Guangdong province and will continue on its westward trajectory. It is currently located around 260 kilometers southwest of the SAR and moving at the speed of 12 kilometers per hour. Lo Wing-mo, a former assistant director of the observatory, said the strength of the super typhoon was relatively weaker when passing through Hong Kong, owing to the weather phenomenon known as the eye wall replacement cycle. Leung noted the intensity of the tropical cyclone decreases when the secondary eye wall overtakes its original counterpart, and that process occurred right when Saola reached the shores of the SAR. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
While Saola was passing by Hong Kong, gale-force winds were felt in many parts around town. In Tseung Kwan O, windows fell from height from an office tower and a residential unit. Authorities received 1,200 reports of fallen trees. Not only government workers, but also residents volunteered to remove debris from the street. This is the bedroom where a 6 feet by 6 feet glass panel fell from height at around 8 p.m. Friday. Now it's just an empty hole. The apartment involved is at Lohas Park in Tseung Kwan O, and the owner has only stayed here for about 1 year. Shards of glass were scattered on the table inside the apartment. The owner said there was a loud bang while his wife was doing housework. She suffered injuries to her legs because of the flying glass. The owner said it was never windy at his apartment before, as it is blocked by other buildings. District Councillor Christine Fong offered wooden panels to cover the missing glass pane. She said at least 10 residents have reached out to her for help during the typhoon. Another resident of the building said the lamps were shaking last night when he was watching a movie at home and he had to take pills to stop motion sickness. A structural engineer explained that some movements during a typhoon is normal.
In the current couple of patterns of wind effect, we have allowed 100 to 500 mm movement for the building, which is in the safe limit. So actually, during the typhoon coming, if the resident feel a little bit movement, this is quite normal.
Over on Hong Kong Island, strong winds tore off part of the ceiling at Central Plaza. In Causeway Bay Typhoon Shelter, one of the boats was partially submerged after the storm. In Kennedy Town, a cabinet was blown off the rooftop, hitting a car parked on the street below. The front of the car was severely damaged. Trees were blown down in many parts around town. This morning, members of disciplinary forces removed the debris. In Wan Chai, firefighters first secured the fallen trees with ropes and then cut up the branches with an electric saw. In Sai Kung, some children helped remove leaves on the streets as officers took away the branches blocking the road. Despite the government's warning, some people ignored the danger and performed water sport at sea. With the typhoon moving further away from the city, local and international transport are resuming. Air travel is gradually getting back to normal. After the typhoon signal was lowered to number 3 this afternoon, public transport across the city steadily resumed. The MTR, Kowloon Motor Bus and Sun Ferry are among the companies returning to normal service.
Sun Ferry is gradually resuming service this evening, with ferries to Mui Wan and Cheung Chau setting off at 6. Some residents of the outlying islands are finally getting home after being stranded following the earlier ferry suspension. After the typhoon signal was lowered to number 3, the MTR resumed weekend frequency for most trains. Public bus companies are also resuming service, but the high-speed rail service will only be back tomorrow. Meanwhile, flights at the Hong Kong International Airport were suspended during the peak of Super Typhoon Salaw's influence, with 460 flights cancelled. Air travel resumed at 11 a.m. this morning, with many passengers keen to get on a plane. Some travelers are disappointed at delays to their travel plans. The announcements were unclear. The airport authority approved 480 flights today. Chairman Fong, the AA's Deputy Director of Operations, said it is confident of relieving passenger congestion over today and tomorrow. He added as both runways are operating, they will be able to provide the capacity to clear the backlog of flights. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
In Japan, the radioactive element tritium has been detected for the first time in seawater off the crippled Fukushima nuclear power plant since the release of treated wastewater from the facility. The operator of the Fukushima plant, TEPCO, said the tritium concentrations remain low and pose no danger. TEPCO has been taking daily samples from 10 locations within 3 kilometers from where the wastewater is being discharged. The sample in question was taken from the closest point on Thursday, about 200 meters north of the water discharge outlet. The reading was 10 becquerels per liter, which TEPCO has set as the minimum level detectable for daily rapid analysis. Any reading of 700 becquerels per liter or above would halt the discharge. Japan's decision to release the water has come under fire from local activists and foreign governments, particularly China, which has banned all aquatic product imports from Japan. 16 men and 2 women suspected of being part of a gang that robbed armored vehicles were killed Friday in a shootout with police in South Africa's northern Limpopo province. South Africa's National Police Commissioner, Fanny Masemola, told reporters the shooting lasted about an hour and a half. The gang was suspected of robbing armored vans, carrying cash from banks in at least 3 provinces. Police seized 7 automatic rifles and 10 vehicles, including sports cars from the gang. Cash in transit heists are common and often violent crimes in South Korea, with gangs usually heavily armed. Still ahead on tonight's news. Vladimir Putin says he expects to meet Chinese leader Xi Jinping soon. In Singapore, a landslide victory for a former PAP member in the city-state's presidential election. And India launches its first solar mission. Welcome back. The Kremlin has suggested Vladimir Putin will visit Beijing next month. The Russian president also said he expects to meet his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping soon when he spoke to students at the start of the school year. David Garrett reports.
Word spread in this small town that a famous visitor was coming. And as the door opened, cheers filled the air. Vladimir Putin had arrived to greet the people of Turgenovo in the Tver region just west of Moscow. Hooray, we've been waiting for you. We are glad to see you, someone shouted. Putin seemed touched by the sentiment in a town where he has ancestral ties. Earlier, the Russian president went back to school. It was the first day of the new academic year in Russia. Putin met with kids on the outskirts of Moscow. The Kremlin has recently introduced lessons about patriotism, and classes about the war in Ukraine are on the syllabus. In a setting lit more like a TV talk show than a classroom, he answered questions. Putin told the children Russia must remain absolutely invincible, and he spoke about the Great Patriotic War, referring to the Soviet struggle against Nazi Germany. The topic of China came up. Putin suggested he may visit Beijing next month. He told students, there will be a meeting with Xi Jinping. The Chinese president calls me his friend. I'm happy to call him my friend, because this is a man who personally does a lot for the development of Russian-Chinese relations. Xi was in Moscow in March and invited Putin to China. It's likely Putin's trip to Beijing will coincide with October's Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation. Russia has turned increasingly to China as an ally after the West disagreed with the invasion of Ukraine. Children also returned to class in Ukraine. In fact, these youngsters were experiencing their first day at school.
Slava Ukraini!
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed classrooms remotely. Around 40 educational institutions from 23 regions of Ukraine joined the online conversation. Zelensky says 13,000 schools are in operation. Despite the war, he said no Ukrainian child will be forgotten. David Garrett, TVB News.
A former member of Singapore's ruling party has scored a landslide victory to become the city-state's 9th president. Former Deputy Prime Minister Tharman Shanmugaratnam won more than 70% of the vote to become head of state, a largely ceremonial role. Analysts said the landslide victory for a candidate seen as close to the establishment is a sign that Singaporeans generally still trust the ruling People's Action Party.
Amid high-profile scandals and economic uncertainty, Singaporeans wanted credibility from the ruling People's Action Party, or PAP. And according to one political analyst, the city-state's new president, Tharman Shanmugaratnam, is as credible as they come. The 66-year-old former PAP member, running as an independent, won a landslide victory at Friday's presidential election, garnering 70.4% of the votes. He beat Ung Kok Song, former chief investment officer at wealth fund GIC, who gained 15.7% of the votes, and former insurance company head under the national trade union body NTUC, Tan King Lian, who secured 13.9%. Tharman is the third president to be elected since Singapore gave the public the right to choose in 1991, and 9th overall. He is also the third straight PAP triumph after Halimah Yacob and Tony Tan. With 2.5 million Singaporeans voting, Tharman's victory is seen as a vote of confidence for the PAP. In recent times, the party has been rocked by a number of scandals. It includes the resignation of 2 ruling party lawmakers, including the House Speaker, over an inappropriate relationship. And in a country of 5.6 million that prides itself on graft-free government, a public outcry erupted over ministers renting plush state-owned properties and a corruption investigation involving a cabinet minister. In August, Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong admitted his party had taken a hit over the scandals, but vowed to show Singaporeans that trust will remain. Tharman, even as an independent, represents that trust. Though the president is officially the highest political rank in the country, it is a largely ceremonial role. The president has veto powers over any budget or transaction that involves the country's reserves and the appointment or removal of key public officials. And crucially, he or she directs the Anti-Graft Bureau. Nazri Karim, TVB News.
In South Africa, the death toll from Thursday's pre-dawn fire in an apartment building in Johannesburg has jumped to 76, and the number of injured has risen to 88. Meanwhile, police with sniffer dogs and forensic teams searched the gutted remains of the building as survivors waited outside in hopes of retrieving any belongings that may have survived the blaze. And a visit from the country's ruling party was not welcome. Tracy Furness has more.
Members of the African National Congress, alongside clergy from various churches, arrived at the scene in Johannesburg of one of the country's worst fires in living memory. But as the clergy and the members of the ANC started to pray for the victims of the fire, this woman and her son, who were giving food to the victims, booed them.
It's really tragic what's happened, as everybody knows, but to see the ANC and our government come out for their photo ops while people are starving, people are hungry, and they're here singing and, you know, posing for the media really is upsetting, because they could do so much more. They get to leave, they go back to their homes, they get to leave back to their air-conditioned offices, they get to do their photo ops and leave.
Meanwhile, the survivors of the fire wait outside the building as forensic team and police search the ruins of the building. They want to retrieve any possessions that survived the fire. Memories of the deadly inferno are all too raw, as this man says. He injured his leg jumping from a window.
I tried to open the door, but there's too much smoke. Then we closed back the door. Then I tried to jump through the window. So before I jumped, I break the window first. Then I jumped it, but it was floor 4.
Local government officials said that people were trapped inside the building as security gates were locked and there were no proper fire escapes. Many of the building's residents were immigrants and foreign workers. Malawi's foreign ministry said more than 20 of its citizens died in the blaze. And the Tanzanian High Commission in South Africa said at least 5 of the victims were Tanzanian nationals. The building is believed to have housed around 200 families. Tracy Furness, TVB News.
Following on the success of India's moon landing, the country's space agency launched a rocket today to study the sun. The rocket left a trail of smoke and fire as it left Earth. It's India's first such solar mission. The rocket launch was watched by more than 860,000 viewers, while thousands gathered at a viewing gallery near the launch site. The probe aims to study solar winds, which cause disturbances on Earth commonly seen as auroras. Named after the Hindi word for the sun, the Aditya L1 spacecraft is designed to travel 1.5 million kilometers over the next 4 months. That's the news. Thanks for joining us.